We have been asked about our commitment to taking part in illegal protests and intentions for the future. This is also my opportunity to explain why I did what I did, hopefully in a more coherent way than I did at the trial. Firstly, as well as it being my choice and preference, it's important for me to acknowledge the difficulty I have in standing here representing myself. I've had to work through many layers of anger, fear, and other emotional processing to get here. It's difficult to not feel only blind rage in relation to a person and a system that has put me and so many others into the shameful, harmful, inhumane, and utterly dysfunctional UK prison system. During the trial, when the judge threatened to send the jury's employers to prison for contempt, he confirmed that intimidation is absolutely intended in this setting too. This is a violent system. I also have to start with acknowledging the huge difficulty I have in holding the reality of the wider situation we are all in my psyche, my heart, and my body. The harm we are causing to ourselves, to our fellow humans, and all other beings, and our incredible, beautiful home is horrific. Every day I struggle to hold the insanity of our collective behaviour within me. And I know that what I think and feel is a healthy response to what's going on. During the trial, the judge informed us that the circumstances of the possible danger of climate change are irrelevant, and the Court of Appeal soon after adopted the same approach. I do not understand how the objective basis for our actions can be irrelevant. How can the greatest threat humanity has ever seen be irrelevant? How can it be that in the same year, the UN Secretary-General says we are living through climate collapse in real time, and the courts say that this is irrelevant? This feels like a madness. No wonder young people feel hopeless and despairing when they understand what's going on around them and what's coming, and know that people in positions of authority are utterly neglectful, to say the very least, and actively and knowingly making things worse. Xavier Gonzalez Tremor. Why I did this. Starting with a threat to life, these are not my beliefs. The continued use of fossil fuels is killing millions globally every year through air pollution. Further millions are displaced every year due to climate-related disasters, which are becoming ever more frequent due to our abuse of fossil fuels. Climate deaths are difficult to quantify, but DARA International estimated that way back in 2012, there were hundreds of thousands of deaths each year, mostly children. This is not a future problem. All of these lives are as precious as ours. I will leave it to Heidi to very eloquently set out the disasters and extremes we had been seeing in the run-up to our action. Almost all of the list she mentions I remember clearly, when I'm not blank with stress like I was on the stand in the trial. When the body that was formed under the Climate Change Act to advise the UK government said in 2019 that there are no areas where the government is planning properly, it was, and still is, hard to find words to describe how serious and scary that is to hear. In April 21, Frans Timmermans, the Vice President of the EU Commission, said, and it rings so clearly, today's children will face a future of fighting wars for water and food. We are already facing significant impacts on our harvests, even here. Do we understand what that means? The prospect of wars over resources and conflict caused by and exacerbated by climate conditions is an almost unbearable intergenerational injustice. Our collective emissions targets for changing track as an international community have been described by the UN Secretary-General as the bare minimum, and we are wildly off course. At the time of the action, we were heading for double the global heating that we'd agreed upon, obviously with more than catastrophic consequences. Catastrophic doesn't even touch it. Finally, in this section, not to be missed out is the loss of biodiversity as an equal threat to climate change. This will erode and is eroding the foundations of our economies, livelihoods, food security, law and order, health and quality of life worldwide. If the government's primary duty is to protect the people, then the form of democracy we have is failing. We took this action because the institutions and systems that we relied upon were not working, and they do not seem to really understand the danger, although they do know about it. It's baffling and utterly terrifying. Why JP Morgan specifically? JP Morgan, more than any other bank, are fueling this crime against humanity. It's not us that society needs protecting from. They are pouring petrol onto the fire in the form of hundreds of billions of dollars of fossil fuel investments, including the expansion of what we desperately need to contract. Their profits are immense. JP Morgan's own report stated that climate change was a threat to the survival of the human race. They say they want climate action and a sustainable environment, but they are leading the way with the damage. If JP Morgan changes, it leads the market. I don't think that these bankers are intending to kill people and crash the economy, but it's as if they are blinded by the acquisition of wealth, or captured by addiction, or in an altered state of consciousness, asleep, or compartmentalizing to the absolute extreme. I believe that almost all humans have caring and compassion within them, and this can be reached. When you see doctors and grandmothers breaking your windows in objection to your work, I believe this has great potential for change. I took action in the hope that people in those offices and in the wider JP Morgan Corporation and people in general are moved to take the next bold step that they can to make drastic change. There have been extensive attempts to change JP Morgan's behaviour by citizens with much more gentle methods of communication than we used. Our communication was bold. As the 4 doctors and 2 nurses on trial this week also identified, if there is a health emergency situation, and that is absolutely what this is, a priority, an urgent and absolutely necessary response is to try to prevent more harm being caused. They too broke JP Morgan's windows. London has been described as the heart of financial corruption. I am outraged by the links between JP Morgan and our government. As just one example, Sajid Javid worked at JP Morgan before joining the government and returned to JP Morgan soon after leaving his role in the top financial position in this country in 2020. Nothing unusual there for the financial industry. Is his work in government motivated by the interests of the people or by the economic growth and profit that seem to have become the priority over human life and a habitable planet? When the economy primarily serves the interest of corporations, I don't see how this is a democracy. So the threat is existential, largely ignored and rapidly developing. Therefore, the burden falls to ordinary people to step up and help create the change. We have a duty and would be insane to not try and do the things that might work to change our situation and our course. We know from history that when ordinary people take a stand against injustice and take bold action, otherwise unimaginable or seemingly impossible things can be created from these ordinary people upwards. Some examples include the UK poll tax refusal, boycotts, divestment, sanctions, strikes, movements for people's civil rights, including gay rights, disabled rights, voting rights, communities resisting pipelines, fracking, mining, deforestation, water pollution, deportations, evictions, and colonial domination. Former UN climate chief Christiana Figueres of Costa Rica said, "Civil disobedience is not only a moral choice, it's also the most powerful way of shaping world politics." Emmeline Pankhurst said, "The argument of the broken window pane is the most valuable argument in modern politics." Her statue is right next to the Houses of Parliament. In April 2019, a huge uprising of people closed down areas in central London for 2 weeks. And by the start of May that year, UK Parliament had declared a climate and nature emergency, finally being open and truthful with the public about the scale of the threat. A net zero target and citizens' assembly followed. Again, we see public action, disobedience driving change. However, adequate action did not continue to follow from the government. And when all other avenues have been exhausted and the stakes are so high, it is reasonable and I think necessary to take peaceful steps that I think have a reasonable chance of succeeding. Perhaps we will fail. But I can't accept the lack of an appropriate response. We are part of a powerful international movement of many organisations and many people, humans coming together and resisting this madness. What happens in this courtroom, and to me, is not really important. We have some signs that this may be working. A few days after we broke the windows, the Financial Times described XR as annoying but performing a vital function. We have statements from senior level people in banking who support these actions and say they have enabled change and are needed. Mark Carney thanked Gail Bradbrook for her work after she had broken windows and said that financial regulations can be changed by social movements, whose role is to change what is politically, morally, and socially acceptable. We know that many people in JP Morgan are talking about what has happened to their windows. Since the windows of Barclays and HSBC were broken, both banks have divested from new oil and gas projects. Public pressure contributes. Finally, looking to the future, the law and my intentions. The more I've interacted with the law around so-called protest, the less it makes sense to me. The first glaring question in my mind is, why has the law not protected life from the level of harm and threat we now face? What on earth is its overall purpose, if not that? When the High Court has ruled that the UK's climate plans are illegal for the second time in less than 2 years, aren't the people objecting by taking direct action potentially upholding the law rather than breaking it? There are repeated circumstances that in which causing some limited and proportionate damage to prevent harm and loss of life is decided in a courtroom to not be a crime. We have seen this happen many times, and I believe this could have happened for us had we had a fair trial. The so-called justice system does not seem to like these acquittals and has tightened around us, removing more and more defences. If only instead we could deal with the reasons for these trials. When the European Court of Human Rights rules that a group of Swiss women's human rights are being violated by their government's inaction, surely it follows that ours are too. It's my understanding that the High Court recently ruled that the government also broke the law in creating protest or anti-protest legislation. What's going on? And what are the consequences of this? What does it tell us when the government ignores legal rulings such as from the Supreme Court on Rwanda? Does the rule of law mean that the powerful get to choose which laws they want to follow? And why can't all the laws in the world prevent the mass slaughter of children and adults in Gaza? The Union for Senior Civil Servants has an unprecedented legal challenge. They're concerned that carrying out their jobs could mean they're breaking the law. What's going on? It's clear that the interest of private companies profiting from the continued destruction of life on Earth are influencing the legal framework around people who object to this. This seriously brings into question the legitimacy of future legal restrictions on objectors. Who is influencing the law? Considering how connected the finance and fossil fuel industries are to the government, how can we believe that the law and its interpretations have the interests of ordinary people at its centre? wealthy corporations seem to be able to buy up new laws in the form of injunctions. So a law could suddenly appear, and as part of the strange logic of injunctions, I could be retrospectively responsible for breaching it before it was even in existence, not to mention sent to prison without trial. The UN Special Rapporteur for Environmental Protection has serious concerns about many aspects of the state repression of environmental protest and civil disobedience in the UK, identifying it as a major threat to human rights and democracy. He mentions restrictions specifically placed on me in the courtroom. This is surreal. The legal system seems to be being manipulated against us to stop us. It's exhausting, and it's meant to be. It's a system that uses violence. I cannot know what the future holds, and amidst this chaos, whilst it's not my intention to break the law, my commitment is not to the law. It's well known that the law and justice are not always the same thing. And whilst this court could only see and validate the damage to the windows and not the damage being done from inside that building, whilst finance and politics and law seem largely unable to protect human and other than human life or act on behalf of the young, I know where my dedication lies. This year, Sir David King said, "On our current path, civilization as we know it will disappear." I will do what I can to try and change that path. We have such a responsibility. Such a responsibility. I intend to continue to try and find what stability I can in my life, in a world containing much change, danger, and instability. I intend to expand my capacity to serve others, particularly young people, and particularly the flock of young children in my family. I intend to stay connected to the reality of serious disruption for those around the world. I will not look away, and I will emotionally engage as I can. I intend to continue working outdoors, growing and harvesting food for the local community, supporting woodland management, supporting a forest school, supporting traditional crafts and conservation. I will continue to do what I decide is necessary to retain my integrity in a time when it's difficult to make sense of the world and what we're doing to ourselves. I will continue to do whatever I believe is appropriate to respond to what comes, like we all have to, and I will accept the consequences. My commitments are not to this court, but to all of this. That's all I would like to say.